Friday. And again, we're back at the Judiciary and Public Safety Conference Committee. This is May 7th, 2021. We'll be starting today's agenda by completing our question and answers with the Department of Public Safety Commissioner John Harrington. We ran out of time during our last hearing, and I know that members still had additional questions for the Commissioner. I know that this is a very important discussion because just reviewing recent headlines in the newspaper, it seems like we're having, well, crime does not go away. We're having a running gun battle in St. Paul just a few days ago. And we had a hostage situation in a bank in St. Cloud just yesterday. Thankfully, no one was harmed. But nevertheless, as we talk about reform in law enforcement, I think we have to keep all of these realities in our mind, simply because I believe there needs to be a balance between law enforcement and our communities, but the communities deserve safety. And we also have to keep a very clear mind on the threat and the violence that continues to persist. And as policymakers, I think it's important for us to keep that in our minds. We're going to move into a discussion with Commissioner Harrington first. When we left our discussion, there were a few questions that were on the board that we could not, or raised, hands were raised at the time we left. And after Commissioner Harrington's portion, then we'll move on to a discussion about VCETs, Violent Crime Enforcement Team, provision found in Article 1 of the Senate bill. And we have Sheriff Bob Fletcher to give us testimony at that time. And then after that, we will hear testimony on the dangers and the rising danger and the volume of fentanyl and what it means to the safety of our communities. We're going to be talking with St. Louis County Attorney Mark Rubin and Dr. Charlie Resnikoff from the Hennepin Healthcare. And of course, Bob Small with the Minnesota County Attorneys Association is also in the wings to answer any questions. And other than that, no additional testimony will be taken at this meeting. But why don't we start with Commissioner Harrington. Commissioner Harrington, welcome back. We appreciate your insight and your professional approach to managing the DPS. I think we're going to begin. I think Senator Andrews had his hand up at the last meeting, or Matthews, I'm sorry. I don't know why I keep mixing that name up, but why don't we begin by raising some questions. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, you're not the first and likely won't be the last to mix my first and last names up. That's happened quite regularly. Hopefully I'll answer to both. Commissioner, thank you for being here today. I have a few questions on topics related to the budget and the agency's work. But first off, I wondered if you had any comments to yesterday's situation in St. Cloud. Is the BCA involved with that? Is there any insight from your perspective? It's just shocking how unfortunate a situation. And I represent right next to St. Cloud, so I have constituents that are there regularly. And thankfully, everyone appears to be uninjured. The situation was resolved after multiple hours, but does the BCA have any roles in that, or did you have any perspective on yesterday?
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Harrington.
Thank you. Senator Matthews, I'll try not to get those confused. The BCA was not directly involved. This was the St. Cloud Police Department as the local agency. And then the FBI, because they have jurisdiction over bank robberies, became the lead federal agency. BCA did support the work there primarily through the Fusion Center, our information gathering center, trying to make sure that local information around who the suspect was, things along that lines, could be transmitted and could be used by both FBI and by the St. Cloud Police Department. I'd say two things about it. It's still obviously an open investigation. I don't have a lot of inside information on it, but the two things that I would note about it is, number one, this appears to be a mental health crisis as much as it was a bank robbery. At least there was stories about that. And so if that is in fact the case, I think it speaks to the continued need for better services in regards to those that are under crisis. The other piece that I will say, though, is that this is really quite literally a textbook of how you're supposed to handle a hostage situation. Time is on your side. And so to the extent that we have the resources to be able to extend the timeline, this is exactly how you would like to be able to resolve almost every case you can. The longer you can hold this out, the longer you can remain in conversation, the better chance you have for both the hostages and the suspect to be able to be extricated from the situation with no loss of life. So I was extremely gratified to see Chief Blair Anderson in charge of that. He has a wonderful reputation. He has a very well and robust police department. And between that and the federal resources that were brought in, and at least I think from my perspective, fairly de minimis state resources that assisted them, this was resolved safely. It did take time. What we hope for at this point is that the folks that were held hostage for that extended period of time are well at this point, because you know that even though they physically did not appear harmed as they left the bank, that has to take a psychological toll, because you don't know how this is going to be resolved one way or another.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate that response. And I'll just take a second to say a public thank you to the local law enforcement agents and the federal agents for the work they did for resolving the situation without injuries. We owe them a lot, and we are grateful for all the work that they did on the ground yesterday. So, Commissioner, I'm wondering if I could talk to you about your division of alcohol and gambling enforcement. Could you, I want to go a couple different directions with it. You have licensed peace officers, and there is a division for that in the budget. Under the considerations of multiple budgets that we were pulling together. Did you have your peace officers helping in the response to the Chauvin trial or in Brooklyn Center in these last few weeks and months? Could you explain the role that your particular division plays in this picture?
Commissioner Harrington.
Senator Matthews, AG was not really directly involved in either OSN or in terms of frontline uniform response to OSN or to the Brooklyn Center shooting. What we did use AGE investigators to do is to supplement the BCA and our intelligence gathering operation. We wanted to make sure that we would have people that would be available to do interviews, to do follow-up, and to do background pieces as additional pieces of information came in to essentially to support the information gathering operation. So they were involved in that. In the first case of the George Floyd protests and riots from the preceding year, they also helped staff the MAC, the Multi-Agency Command Center, and they were an assisting agency there as we were trying to pull together all the resources necessary to reduce the violence and to stop the looting.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair?
Senator Matthews.
One final question. I appreciate that. Could you then give me a status? I know that your officers were involved, and I believe some in my district last November or December. That division was an enforcement division that was going around and suspending licenses and shutting businesses down and fining people that were open in violation of the executive orders. When we had small business owners on the brink and no relief in sight coming from the administration, and a group that was trying to just frankly survive. And I got quite a few amazing emotional stories from people in my district of just how much they were on the brink and how they literally needed to try to work to do something to survive, to have the holiday season coming up, provide holidays for their kids and all of that. And your agents were going around, we're closing things down, and then we're levying fines and suspensions on our small businesses. And I was quite disgusted and irritated by that, especially when it went beyond just the closing down for that day and all of that. You know, that probably could be understood, but how this came around and hitting them with a double whammy, a second or sometimes even a third time of additional fines and suspensions. Seemed like that was the picture of where I saw those agents most active. If you say they're not directly involved with on the ground with the responses under Operation Safety Net or whatnot, they're more indirect support. But they're going around and impacting our small businesses and levying fines and all of that. So maybe you could update me on the status of where you're at with those cases. I think those fines and suspensions should be restored because I've heard, at least from some small businesses, that is likely the thing that would put them under, that they'd barely survived COVID, that they barely survived the shutdowns and lockdowns. The fines could be the final thing that would do them in. And that's not what any of us want to see. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit. And I'd like to hear some assurance that your agency is now willing to step in and try to help rather than the behavior we were seeing before. Thank you.
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator, the AGE was directed by me to do investigations in cases where we had businesses that were noted to be operating in violation of the law. The state law that regulates liquor establishments requires them to be in compliance with state law. Those were laws that the executive orders were passed lawfully. They had been challenged in court. And so our instructions were to enforce the laws out there. I will tell you that we did this very much in a community policing fashion by initially contacting local police and asking them to reach out to those businesses and ask them to come into compliance. When they continued to not come into compliance, and in some cases became very vocal in their very deliberate decision to not comply with the state law, our investigators did do investigations where we did find violations of either regulatory acts or state law. We did issue letters. We went through the entire process of issuing them letters to make sure they understood what the issues were, giving them an opportunity to defend themselves in front of an ALJ or to appeal. In many cases, they did take that opportunity. Some of them are still in that process right now. And in those cases where an ALJ made the decision that they were in fact in violation of the law, the ALJ would have issued a fine or would have sustained a suspension of their liquor license at that time. At the same time, and I will say this, is that I know that DEED and other state agencies were reaching out to businesses with PPE and other business sustainment grants. I can't speak to that specifically for these particular bars in your district, but I know that there was a great deal of effort from my agency to make sure that to the extent that we could do this the easy way, which would have been simply having them comply with their local police agencies' request for them to come into compliance. That was our first attempt, and it was typically only after we had repeated violations that we got to a point where we were, in fact, imposing regulatory sanctions.
Mr. Chair, briefly.
Yes. Senator Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate that perspective. It's not the view of how I've heard stories on the ground in my district. I know there's a difference there. I read one of the reports or one of the complaints filed against a local business, and there was no allegation of violation of state law. The only thing printed on this ticket was violation of executive orders, which I thought was quite egregious. Obviously, you know that the executive orders have been very controversial, and I know that you're not going to admit or share my perspective of how they've been overused, but seeing that an enforcement mechanism based solely off an executive order that's just decreed from the governor, and not even stating a law that the businesses are in violation of, just added to the frustration and the anger and the angst of how this administration was handling it and how enforcement divisions were enforcing it. So I'll leave it at that for now. Clearly a difference of opinion on that. Disappointed in how the agency was used, and I'll leave it at that for now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Matthews. Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I had a couple of questions. And, first, I think it's interesting that there are comments right now basically supporting people violating the law because they don't agree with it. Executive orders are law. There are all kinds of times when we don't agree about what is best in law, but the correct way to handle that is through the work that we do. And I just think that's interesting, the sort of the compassion that folks find, when we're facing having a liquor license suspended. And I would really urge folks to find even more compassion when people's lives are actually in danger, which is what we have happening in some other areas. And so I would hope that we don't have disagreement on what is law. We can disagree about whether we like the law or we think it is a good law, but ultimately executive orders are the law, and folks need to follow it. That's that's a basic premise of our society and public safety. I did want to get back to what happened in St. Cloud yesterday. I know I was following it closely as well. I think, like a lot of people, I have friends and family in the area, and obviously anytime something like that happens, it's really concerning. What I thought was really great, though, it was really heartening to see the officers follow the model policies, follow the things that we know work for those things to end well. And so I'm wondering, Commissioner Harrington, if you can speak a little bit to that. Obviously the officers in St. Cloud don't face hostage situations on a daily basis, but because we have model policies and we have the data and we know what works for those things to end in the least bad way possible. Just wondering if you can talk a little bit about model policies and how those can be helpful with things that might not happen on a daily basis.
Commissioner Harrington.
Chairman Limmer, Becker-Finn. Yes, I do appreciate the question, and I'll answer that question before making another comment. The St. Cloud Police Department under Blair Anderson's leadership has been extremely well-trained, and oftentimes it has been a department that has been tested. It is not a department. It's not Minneapolis. It's not St. Paul, obviously, but they are also not a small town. They're a college town, and because of that, I think they have really worked very diligently to stay at the top of the game in terms of making sure that their officers are well trained, that they're familiar with the model policies, and they do a phenomenal job of community policing. And once again, I think that is really the hallmark of what you saw yesterday. Was a partnership of a team of officers who immediately were able to mobilize, control the crime scene, make sure that nobody got hurt, establish communications. All of those are exactly what you would want to see. They did not rush. That, I think, is one of the most important things that police officers have learned over the years, is that with the exception of an active shooter in a school, taking your time and controlling the tempo and continuing to maintain communications is the right way to resolve hostage situations, whether it is a bank robbery or a domestic violence case or any other kind of case. So I really do appreciate both the effort that went into the model policies that they were following, and also the additional effort that went into providing support for the training that these officers, both the SWAT team that they had and the other officers that responded immediately in an appropriate way, that really did, I think, lead to a safe and a successful resolution of the hostage situation and the bank robbery.
A quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Representative Beckerfield.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, and I really thank you for your comments, Commissioner Harrington. I think what happened in St. Cloud is a great example of exactly the types of things that we need our police officers for. And I'm just really grateful that for their work in handling the situation so professionally yesterday, and making sure that nobody got hurt. And so ultimately, I just think it's a great example of exactly the kinds of things we need our officers to be doing, and what happens when we have well-trained officers, good model policies, and good leadership within departments. So also just really grateful for their work yesterday and their handling of that. So thank you.
Thank you. Representative Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have a question for both Commissioner Harrington and then another question for Superintendent Evans, who I see is on the call. So if that's okay with you, I'll start with my question for Commissioner Harrington. And this really goes to the notion, that was said at the beginning, that somehow reforming law enforcement makes our communities less safe. And I can tell you that in my 20 plus years working as a prosecutor and as a victim with victim advocates, that actually these two things go hand in hand, because, and I've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating, if people don't trust law enforcement, then victims are less likely to report crimes, witnesses are less likely to cooperate or come forward, and you're going to have trouble with juries convicting guilty people. And so my question for you, Commissioner Harrington, is if you could please speak to the importance of community trust in policing, not only through your experience as a commissioner, but in your past experience as a police chief.
Commissioner Harrington.
Chair Limmer, Representative Mulder, absolutely. I came on in 1977 when we were, the profession was moving from what we would call professional policing model, which was you stayed in your car, you answered your calls, you took your reports. It was the just the facts, ma'am, Joe Friday dragnet style of policing. And Chief McCutcheon and Chief Rowan moved us from that into a community policing style of policing. And St. Paul has a long history of that style of policing. The tradition of the beat officer in St. Paul is one of the most respected vehicles for that. And the role of the police officer is, in fact, to be that trusted ally of the community that is seen by them on a daily basis without the barrier of the squad car or the office, but is out there with them walking the beat. And because they have that community's trust, what we know is that people are likely to tell the beat officer the secrets that are necessary for successful prosecutions and investigations. And what I always used to say to people is, when I was a beat cop, people knew me more than the badge on my uniform or the color of the badge or anything else. They knew me as a person. Is because of that they were willing to tell me the things that led to my making arrests on people that we wanted to see. It led them to telling me about witnesses that were necessary in order for me to make arrests. And they were willing to then testify because they felt confident that we were going to do something with that information. And that's sort of classic community policing that has been continued to be refined as we move from community policing to team policing. We moved into the era of 21st century policing with the work after the Ferguson riots. And we are continuing to refine that, I think, even as we speak. And I would argue that policing has never been a static profession. We, from 1829 to today, we have continued to enhance and refine how we do the work. And in some cases, we've had to go back to what to the origins policing, that community policing model, in order for us to get it right. And I can tell you that there are times when departments do have to take a step back and realize that the public are the police and the police are the public, and that they are working together to keep the community safe. I always find it interesting that the cities which have been probably the most difficult places to inject community policing are oftentimes the places where it's the most necessary, where there's the most anonymity. And then when we go to greater Minnesota, I often find that I find community policing is just a basic instinct, because there are so few officers in those areas that they have come from the community, they still live in the community, and they still work in that same community. And I think that's part of where that trust comes from, is that long-term relationship building that you see in, whether it's in greater Minnesota, and I can tell you, I see it in my old neighborhoods in St. Paul, where the beat officers still walk the beats every day.
Well, Mr. Chair, I think you were muted there. I'll play Senator Bigham's role and point that out here.
Thank you. That's just what I need. Representative Muller, you wanted to ask a question of Superintendent Evans, but I'm really trying to help us get back to the issue that we have before us, and that's the bill. So go ahead with your question for.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. And it does relate to the Fusion Center. So
all right.
That does go to the bill. But yeah, Superintendent Evans, one thing I'm really concerned about are these extremist ideologies and the threat, particularly white supremacists, thinking about the January 6th Capitol insurrection, especially. And I just wanted to know what the BCA's involvement in any was when that threat was occurring and continues to occur.
Superintendent.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair, and thank you, Representative Muller, for that question. The Fusion Center, our Criminal Information Operations section at the BCA, plays a role when any event like that would happen to occur. And in our Capitol insurrection that occurred on that date, the main role of that Fusion Center for Minnesota is really to intake the information and understand then what the threats are to Minnesota. And we do that in a couple of ways. Some of you may have heard reporting about an FBI product warning of some of this type of activity potentially occurring on that date. That report did not get sent nationwide, but many of them do on a very regular basis. And that's where that reporting, and in our current age of so much information, the role of the Fusion Center is to be that hub to intake information and then disseminate it out to Minnesota law enforcement and public safety partners so they can make their communities safe. In the particular instance that you're referring to, when that event occurred, if everybody would put ourselves back to that day, it was extremely chaotic. In that instance, we were hearing about capitals being breached all over the United States. There was widespread reporting in our media of that occurring. What we do in those situations is we try to understand what's occurring there so we can understand the impact to Minnesota and whether or not there's a broader threat to us and steps we need to take. An example there is that Georgia Capitol was being reported to be overrun. What we have with our Fusion Center network is we can then reach out directly to Georgia to talk to that Fusion Center to understand whether or not that information is true in a vetted scenario. And in this case, that's what we did. And there were several other states that we contacted and were working back and forth with to understand, was this a widespread event or was it occurring in one location in Washington, D.C. at that time, so that we can then inform the commissioner. There's the Homeland Security Advisor for Minnesota, and then also our State Patrol, who has responsibility for Capitol security here in that particular instance. We also, along the same lines of that threat, have in that fusion center embedded analysts both from the Department of Homeland Security and from the FBI. So in this case, we have the Department of Homeland Security Intelligence and Analysis Unit. They work closely with us. In fact, we provided a briefing to the commissioner yesterday on all types of threats, both to Minnesota and the entire United States. And one of those threats continues to be growing ideologies of domestic violent extremists, whether they're racially motivated or they're anti-government in nature. We provide information so that we can assess should there be additional steps that come forward. And again, the Criminal Information Operations section at the BCA Infusion Center is designed to really provide and share that information. It also creates a conduit, so there's a quick way to contact us. In that case, one of the cases that the FBI was working to identify those that were internal, they made a request to us to do some DNA analysis related to one of the individuals they were investigating in DC. We're able to use our rapid DNA technology through that connection that we have, even through the Fusion Center, to connect them with our laboratory. We're able to do the rapid DNA on that case, get the hit so they could further their case in that situation.
Thank you, Superintendent. Superintendent, if I just had a question and I said it out loud, did it actually happen in many of these capitals? And, even in St. Paul, we were told that something was going to happen. We girded up around the Capitol buildings, and then nothing happened. So perhaps just giving an indication to the public that we're prepared for something doesn't always, well, it might be a preventative in actually having some group actually, they might just back off their plans. And sometimes the Fusion Center can give that resource. It's kind of a side benefit of a Fusion Center with that type of information. Let's see, I think I'm going to move on to Senator Johnson. Senator Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate that. I think this is the furthest that we've gotten into a committee hearing of any sort where we haven't called Commissioner Harrington Senator Harrington. So he must be fitting into that role pretty well. But just want to get back to something that we haven't touched on for a while, and that's the budget. So I'm looking at the spreadsheet that we've got, the comparison, and one of the biggest deltas we have between the Senate position, the House, and the governor is the Office of Justice Programs. With the governor, we're about 29, almost $30 million different in that area. There's a lot of new and different ideas in there. But I want to just draw your attention to, I have an article from back when Commissioner Harrington was Chief Harrington. And in that article with NPR, he stated, there are two huge problems affecting Black America, and that's the high rate of out-of-wedlock births and gang activity. Just last weekend, Chair Limmer said that there was, 173 shots fired. Sounds like that was a gang-related event that happened around the streets. And so when I look at this budget and I look at the ideas that the governor is proposing and the House is proposing, I want to know what we're going to be doing about some of those issues that we have in the state. That's where a lot of the violent crimes and deaths are happening, with those related gang activities, and then that stems from broken families as well. So Commissioner Harrington, I just want to know, do you believe that the proposals put forth in the governor's budget that are reflected in the spreadsheet are going to address some of these problems with gang activity or the broken home?
Commissioner Harrington.
Chair Limmer, Senator Johnson, And thank you for both the recognition of my prior role and my current role. And I absolutely do believe that. And one of the things that was the result of my observations around gang activity back in 2004 or in that period was the creation of a more robust juvenile unit and a gang unit in St. Paul. The gang unit and the juvenile unit both had a primary mission of preventing young people from joining gangs. And I do believe that that is still one of the most important things that the state can do on a statewide basis, because one of the observations I would have probably made at that time was that the gang problem we had then was very mobile. It was no longer a neighborhood-based gang problem. It was moving from location to location and from city to city. And so we needed to have a more robust, it could not be simply a local response. It needed to be broader than that. I really do believe that the juvenile unit that we propose in OJP is part of that solution. It is a major part of that solution because we have not done a particularly good job of trying to prevent and then intervene. And those are I think the two most cost-effective ways of reducing the gang problem today would be to get out ahead of it by preventing young people who are on the bubble, who might be looking and considering it, and giving them a good reason to say no to that. And then just as importantly, helping them and their community respond when young people do decide that they are going to join a gang. What I have seen when we do that is we recover those young people. We turn their lives around. We help them get back into school and get back into their families and get back into their communities. And because of that, they become lawful and supportive members of the Minnesota community. And so I think the juvenile justice piece that we have in OJP's model is really an essential component of reducing the gang violence and reducing crime in general. The other piece is, I believe, also the Minnesota Heals piece of working with community to provide them with the support they need in the community after a tragedy. We see so often that there is trauma in a community, whether it's a shooting or a series of shootings that creates the trauma. And if the community and its police department aren't prepared to help those young people respond in an appropriate way, you get inappropriate responses to that trauma. And sometimes that inappropriate response is payback shootings, or it's payback beatings, or it's increased reliance on gangs for protection. So I really do believe that both the Minnesota Heals part of that and the juvenile justice part are absolutely essential for us to really start reducing, both in the short term and in the long term, the crime problem that Senator Limmer and I have both have spoken about.
Commissioner Harrington, I'm just going to interject a little bit. I know that you and I share the view, especially with my experience as a correction officer. I would create an informal poll as I spoke with different people behind bars, always asking them, what was your family life like? And I would say 80, 85%, very high percentage, people involved in crime most likely come from broken or abusive homes. And I think your comments back that was quoted is still accurate. When we look at the OJP programs, and I'm trying to get myself even more familiarized with them now, it doesn't seem like even the OJP seems to direct itself toward perhaps helping families cope with the difficulties that they may have, and then that frustration often manifests itself in abuse or anger. Anger management is a big deal. I remember a story of a inmate who, when he was about 12 years old, he went to school one day, and his parents rented the lower level of a duplex. And 10 o'clock that night when he came back, but at 10 o'clock in the evening, a neighbor saw this young man sitting outside his house, outside his front door, huddled up on the front porch, because his family had entirely moved away. He came home to an empty house. And child services were called, but here he was. I ran into him in the Hennepin County workhouse with a trigger anger issue, a temper that would flare off just a drop of a hat. And I keep wondering why we have to keep directing our funds toward the outcomes of that, but we don't always put enough up front on the help to families or single moms that are struggling with the pressure of raising children. And so, but it all goes back to, oftentimes it generates into crime, and then crime starts, a lot of these isolated kids get involved in the criminal justice system or street gangs, and they find their family in there. So I think it's important to realize. Senator Johnson, I interrupted. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Well, my response to that is OJP, for example, funds a program that is near and dear to my heart, Ujamaa Place. Ujamaa Place is a program where we take young men who are coming almost directly out of prison or incarceration, and in recognition of the fact that many of them have come from broken families, we provide a new extended family of bigger brothers and cousins and uncles and coaches and mentors who then help them get through the trauma and get past the anger and get back to work and get back in connection with their children and their families and their churches and their communities. And so that's some of the work that OJP is currently funding. And there are many other programs very similar to that, whether it's a Wally Place, and there are a number of them that OJP is funding that I really do think have been in our minds attempts to both put a cork back in this bottle where but also to really provide a longer term view of how do we respond to violent crime. We know that simply no city, no community has ever arrested its way out of violent crime. We know that we have to have a community-based, trauma-informed response to that if we're going to be successful. There are certain people that obviously are too dangerous to be not incarcerated, but my experience is that 85% of the young people, when I served in juvenile and served as a police chief, they were amenable to outreach and to treatment, but we had to have the right people doing the treatment, and you needed to have the right people with the right temperament and the right abilities and resources to do that. And I just think that needs to be done on a much broader basis than we are currently able to do.
Senator Johnson, I interrupted your line of questions. Did you have another one?
No, you're the chair. You can jump in anytime. Appreciate that. You
have never given me that much authority. Senator Johnson.
Well, it's a courtesy. No, I just had one other follow-up from yesterday's conversation, Commissioner Harrington, and this is an item that you brought up in other hearings that we've had in the past years, and I appreciate it because it's something that I hear from my law enforcement individuals up in rural Northwest Minnesota, and we hear it from downtown St. Paul. But the domestic abuse epidemic that's really going on around the state, it's kind of a quiet epidemic. We don't hear about it as much, but it's one of those things that you have said have really led to a lot of the issues that we're having in criminal justice situation. It probably relates to what Senator Limmer was saying earlier with the broken families and what's going on there. So when I look at the office, the OJP proposals here, I really want to know, do any of these proposals help address that domestic abuse epidemic that we're seeing in the state right now?
Commissioner Harrington.
Chair Limmer, Senator Johnson, absolutely. There is $10 million in our budget that is really community violence response. It is directed to both VAWA issues, violence against women issues broadly, but it is absolutely in support of Violence Free Minnesota, which is probably the biggest group that responds to domestic violence in the state, but also to MNCASA, the Center Against Sexual Assault. what we have seen is that when you do the right thing on the domestic violence piece of this, and when you hold offenders accountable, when you give support to victims of domestic violence, you do provide a vehicle for stability and for safety in the family. And I really do believe that that is one of the most important things we can do. And it's interesting. I think what gets visible is sometimes a function of what the media is paying attention to. If you think about now, 2 years ago, before COVID and before lots of other things became the primary headlines day to day, we ended the year with a triple homicide over in Minneapolis, where a mom and her 2 children were killed in a domestic violence incident. What we were seeing is multiple murder-suicides across the state over the course of the last year. And because they're murder-suicides, I think oftentimes they don't get the publicity that a straight murder with a suspect being sought is given. But we absolutely have continued to see high levels of domestic violence. The conversations I've had with Violence Free and other SPIP, which is the St. Paul Intervention Project, and others, is that not only did we see them in the last year, but they became more difficult for police departments to intervene in, because many of the vehicles that women had for being able to make reports when they went to work, they could make a report because their offender was not going to be with them at work. When they went into the doctor's office, they were able to make a report to a nurse or a doctor because oftentimes their offender wasn't going to be in the room with them. Those vehicles were cut off from them during COVID. And so we saw they had to find other ways of being able to make these reports. And oftentimes, by the time they were able to get that report out, it was difficult to get the evidence. It was difficult to hold the people accountable. And so I really do believe that we are going to see, as we move out of the COVID epidemic, we're going to see the remnants of that trauma throughout much of our community. And so we absolutely need to do more in terms of victim services around domestic violence. It has really awfully ugly tentacles that run through. If you think about the fact that, for every woman that's assaulted in her home, there's likely children that are watching that assault, that are seeing that and are traumatized also as they try and think about how do they protect their mother. There are a number of cases where literally we have seen the child end up assaulted because they made the decision that they were going to step in to try to protect their mother when nobody else seemed to be coming to their aid. I just think that it's a really important component of a holistic picture of how do we stop violence in our community.
Thank you. I'm going to Representative Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Patiently waiting over here after hearing much of this discussion.
Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Chief, Commissioner Harrington, see, I almost called you Chief. I rarely call you Senator, but I usually call you Chief because that's when I first met you. But Commissioner Harrington, please, I want you to pass along to Chief Anderson that my regards. Really appreciate how he coordinated and handled the situation in St. Cloud yesterday. And let him know I plan to connect with him this summer, but please pass that on. I want to get that out the way before I get lost. And
I will absolutely talk to Blair today, and I will pass that on.
Thank you very much. So, I didn't expect the conversation that just happened around the broken families narrative for Black and Brown communities. Every chance I get, I just totally reject that narrative. I don't know if there's any social psychologists or sociologists sitting in this room right now, but that narrative has been dispelled time and time again. So I totally reject it. What I will point out is that, there have been plenty of studies that talk about the actual data and how policies that legislators, just like us, sitting on this call right now, put in place that cause these issues in these communities. Now, there was an article done by the New York Times. I'm just going to read an excerpt from it that kind of gets at that. It says that there are 1.5 million missing Black men. This is nationwide in the communities. Incarceration and early deaths are the overwhelming drivers of the gap. Of the 1.5 million missing Black men from 25 to 54, which the demographers call the prime age years, higher imprisonment rates account for almost 600,000 of those men are taken out of the community because of higher incarceration and imprisonment rates. Almost 1 in 12 Black men in this age group are behind bars. That's compared with 1 in 60 non-Black men in that same age group. Policies do that. Policies that people like us put in place every single session do that. We just had a sitting legislator suggest that in his community, we shouldn't enforce laws. His community does not look like the community that I came from. Sitting legislator just suggested that right before this broken families conversation began to happen. So the message we're sending is that let's not over-police and enforce the laws in communities that are not Black and brown. Let's not put them in jail, take those individuals out of the community, and then frame them as broken families. Let's not do that. Let's do it in all these other communities, and then blame the victims, blame those that have been harmed by our policies. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable. So again, I reject this notion of these broken families. Now, all of us, we need to look in the mirror, and we need to put policies in place and resources into those communities to make sure that we break these cycles. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Frazier. Just to put a highlight or a focus on it, my observation when I was a correction officer was not, my comments were, and the concept of broken and abusive families was not directed to any racial group. It was my observation of the entire prison population that I was working in at the time over about 4 years. And that was my personal observation. Perhaps maybe a national study might point in a different direction, but I know what I saw, I know what I heard, and of course my observation was rather informal. But there is a problem that usually starts in the home when kids become either antisocial, they become suicidal, or they get involved in criminal activity. It was not directed toward any particular racial group at all. This was just a general observation across the entire prison population. We'll move on to Representative Carlos Mariani, or Chair Mariani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And actually, this is an important conversation for us to have because obviously we are the products of policy decisions, all of us in our society. We either make opportunities happen or we make barriers happen as a result of our policy decisions. And part of us coming together every year as a legislature should involve reviewing those policies and then using the power that we're authorized to use to change those policies if in fact we're learning that they're causing harm. Let me just say unequivocally that there's nothing wrong with Black families in Minnesota. A good part of my family are Black, a good part of my family are brown, a good part of my family are white. And I can tell you just on a personal bit, there's nothing wrong with Black families in Minnesota. However, there is harm that's happening to those families in a disproportionate manner. And those harms are not just, captured by data, at the large national level. It's actually data right here. And in many ways, Minnesota does more harm than any other parts of the state. We lock up an incredible disproportionate amount of Black men, brown men and Indigenous men, and women in our state. You only have to go visit, our facilities to see the visual impact of that. We stress Black men in particularly huge in something as simple as engaging in driving automobiles. We just saw the report issued by, I believe, the Star Tribune or Carol 11, I can't remember, just yesterday. In Minneapolis alone, 29, there's a 29 times more greater stops of Black men than other men on our streets in Minneapolis. 29 times. We hire Black men at less rates, far less rates than virtually any other group in our state. The unemployment rates continue to be double digit. With this citizen demographic in our state, we lend to Black men at rates far lower than others. The totality of asset holding on the part of African American communities in our state's in the negative. In the negative. There are no assets, financial assets in these communities. That's not an accident. We suspend young Black men from our schools at 7 to 10 times higher than any other group in our schools. And the odds of Black men graduating from high school in our state is 50%, half. That's the product of our public school systems. And so you add all these things up consistently, and we have an architecture for committing harm, particularly for this community. And our job here is to understand that, to analyze how policies do that, and then to change policies to go in the opposite direction. Obviously, Mr. Chair, this committee, conference committee, the committee you chair and I chair, can't address all these issues. But we need to be cognizant of them, and we need to make sure that our public safety policies are aware of them and don't contribute to that harm and complement a whole different direction. And I think that's what the governor's proposal, Commissioner, has before us with the Minnesota HEALS proportion or component in the investment in community-based groups to be able to equip themselves in such a way that can help to counter some of these big, harms that are just, baked into the design of our delivery system, whether we're aware of it or whether we like it or not. And so I do think that what the commissioner has laid before us is a balanced approach to all this. I mean, there is definitely investment in things like the Fusion Center, law enforcement, more traditional law enforcement provisions, along with these supports that are meant to be aware of these harms that absolutely exist here in this state. And I would hope that we mirror that, as we go forward. As we dig deeper into this, the appropriations here, we should absolutely be asking the question of one another. What are we doing in terms of more traditional law enforcement, and what are we doing in terms of the supports that our citizens deserve in order to successfully combat against these true dynamics that are targeting, in many cases, like I would submit, are being targeted toward African American communities and Black men in particular. And so, I just want to commend the commissioner for coming forward. I obviously didn't agree with everything that we have, but that's part of what this conversation is about, is to learn, hear, adjust to one another. But I just really do want to strongly, because we are in public, absolutely dispel any notion that there is something wrong with Black families in Minnesota. There isn't. What we have are huge challenges that are part of our policies in the state of Minnesota, and it's our duty to change those policies so that we stop doing harm to this community and to many other communities as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you for those comments, Chair Mariani. You and I have had discussions offline from time to time, and I would agree in general with most of what you just said. And so I do want to keep our focus back on our bill, but it's good to keep the background alive as well. So thank you for that perspective, Chair Mariani. I'm going to go with Senator Ingebrigtsen at this time. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm going to go to a couple of, I suppose we would say, pointed questions with BCA Director Drew Evans here. I'd like to ask one question about the information center that he has when they communicate back and forth with regards to supremacist groups. Can you tell me, and there's been a lot of talk about this, in fact, this has snuck its way over into the police accountability, police training, police post board committee over there. And it's about white supremacy. Can you tell me, is it known in Minnesota, or do you know of any licensed law enforcement officers in Minnesota that belong to white supremacist groups?
Senator, who is that directed toward? Superintendent?
Mr. Evans.
Superintendent Evans.
Mr. Chair and Senator Ingebrigtsen, I'm not aware of any in particular, and nobody that's been identified to be identified as a criminal investigation, for example, being a part of a white supremacist organization. I can tell you that, there's concern, obviously, societally about growing rhetoric that we are observing about people involved in domestic violent extremist groups. But to answer your point, your question pointedly, I am not aware of any specific officers being identified as part of a group at this particular time.
Thank you.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to go to Commissioner Harrington and some of the things that he and I know about and working together and working as many years as we have in the field of law enforcement in Minnesota. Now, coming from rural Minnesota, certainly different than metro Minnesota. But I've seen a big change over the years, and I've seen a big change in training, traveling myself to the National Sheriff's Association, being involved in that, knowing that, visiting with other sheriffs and other chiefs throughout the country, and come to find out that, a lot of people, a lot of departments come to our community, to our Midwest area here to hire their cops. And I know you made the comment of cops being of the gold standard, or at least that's your initiative, is to get them to be the gold standard. Do you consider Minnesota cops with the qualifications that are needed in comparison to others in the nation? And I know you've made your rounds like I have in other states. Do you consider Minnesota kind of the gold standard when it comes to training and licensing and qualified police officers?
Commissioner Harrington. You're on mute, Commissioner.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I would say that when the Minnesota Post Board was created in the 1970s, it put Minnesota absolutely as the gold standard at that time. But I do not think that Minnesota has continued to evolve and develop the post-hiring standards over the next 30 plus years in as robust a fashion as they could. To say whether or not we are the gold standard nationally, I would have to say that the 2-year degree requirement, while it is a very high standard in comparison with the high school diploma that was still required in many places when I came on the job, in this day and age, with the complexity that we're asking peace officers to act, we're asking them to act as social psychologists, as marriage counselors, as therapists, as medics, and all these other things. I'm not sure that the 2-year degree is any longer sufficient. And many departments have on their own decided that it's not sufficient, and they've gone to a higher standard on their own. But as a state, I'm not sure that the 2-year degree is still as sufficient as it once was. I also question, and this is a question that I've had since I have taught at some of the public and private institutions that provide the post-education, whether or not the amount of time that we provide to officers in pre-service is really sufficient anymore. And the kind of example that I will use is that the curriculum for skills, as we know it, was largely developed to give them the hands-on academy component, but I'm not sure if it's long enough anymore to really do what we need. Should every officer in the state really be highly trained in CIT, for example? I would argue yes, given that 50% of the calls involve someone that's in crisis. Do we have the time in our current curriculum to do that? I don't think so. I think there are a lot of other areas that we could spend a lot more time in pre-service education. And then finally, and you and I have shared this conversation about how difficult it is for small departments and especially outstate departments to be able to get the kind of real first-class training that the cities or the major sheriff's agencies are able to provide their officers. Just in sense of if I take an officer out of the streets for a week to send them to a school and it's a 2 or 4 person department, it's a 75 to 50% cut to that department's staffing model. And how do they backfill that staffing becomes really problematic. So I think even both in pre-service and in-service, we have some more work to be done. And I'm really very pleased with the work that the Post Board under Kelly McCarthy, the new chair of the Post Board, is doing on looking at what should we be doing in terms of pre-service and in-service training to make sure that Minnesota police officers are as highly trained as anyone in the country, because we certainly don't have any shortage of the challenges that we're seeing nationally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Ingebrigtsen.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Commissioner. As you know, with just a couple comments, Senator Chair Limmer, a couple of years ago, in his budget had an extreme amount of money. I think a very adequate amount of money for training, and I think it just happened here recently in the Judiciary Committee for more training for Minnesota. And what I'm hearing is that and what I'm seeing as compared to what we had before, there's and you mentioned this, that there are a lot of 4-year degree people that are here too in law enforcement, much more so than there was back when you and I started. So I think there's been a huge amount of money invested in our officers. But getting to the more pointed thing that brings us here, I think, is the crime rate that's running. It appears to be rampant in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, and I would like to know what monies in this budget are going to be utilized right now. I mean, we have murders, we have armed robberies, we have carjackings, and I know you have a police department here that's trying to handle this, but what are you, as the top cop of the state of Minnesota, doing immediately to give those that are emailing us all about, we don't even get answers from 911, or there was a knifing going on at 38th and Chicago, and the officers would not even go in there, so they had to be brought out a block away so they could answer this call, because they're not going into that area. This is something that it's absolutely unheard of by people in Minnesota, and certainly the law enforcement family that you and I have come from. So what are you going to be doing, and what is the governor going to be doing about those issues to get control of what's going on right now in Minneapolis and St. Paul? Because you don't see this out in rural Minnesota as often. And I know you made comments that there are just as many shootings in rural Minnesota that there are down here. I think that's probably taken second now to most recently. But tell me what you're doing with the city police department that is governed by commissioners that say we're going to defund the police. Now, you know what? I don't have to ask you the question of what's going to happen if there's talk about defunding police. I think we've already seen that. Give me an idea what the budget that's brought forward today or this year is going to do to help deal with that immediately, Commissioner.
Commissioner Harrington.
Good, I'm not on mute. Senator Ingebrigtsen, Chair Limmer, there's two things that are in this budget that I think directly speak to that. One is, in fact, the post board and the fusion center. So one of the things that we've done, and very specifically around 38th in Chicago, is that we have assigned VCA agents to assist Minneapolis Police Department's investigators so that they can be responsive to 38th in Chicago and to other crimes there. Last year, when we had a beginning spike of the carjacking and a series of shootings, the BCA assigned agents to the Safe Streets Task Force, which was a task force that that DPS, BCA, Hennepin County, Minneapolis, and I believe St. Paul, the U.S. Attorney, and FBI and ATF all convened together to be an immediate response to doing investigations to that increase in crime. We continue to be part of that. In fact, I think the BCA is one of the lead agencies in terms of pulling that together. We still need to do more work in that area. We recognize that as departments have gotten smaller, some of their ability to participate in some of these task forces has eroded. But the state has continued to hold its end of this up in terms of making sure that these task forces exist. And then where there are requests for state assistance, for example, during some of the carjacking issues, the State Patrol's aviation unit was asked to assist Minneapolis in doing that so that we could avoid chases that might endanger people's lives while we were still trying to take people in custody. And so DPS's State Patrol aviation unit was there to assist them with that. So we are continuing to be partners with both on the investigatory side and on the response side to local crime per the request of Chief Arredondo or Chief Axtell or the sheriffs in those communities. And we continue to be ready to do that. And I think the additional assistance that we're asking for the BCA, last year we were asking for more lab people because we recognized we were going to need more ballistics experts, things along that lines to come in. That also has been one of the things that we've been able to do, because with our ballistic people being able to turn the cases around faster, it means we can get people into court faster also. So we can hold people accountable more rapidly because of the work that we've already started in the forensic area and the work we're doing in investigations. Mr. Chair.
Senator Ingebrigtsen.
I just have a couple more real quick questions of the commissioner, and when there's talk about in this bill from the House side that traffic stops are something that we should consider eliminating. Maybe that's not the exact word, but we should be talking about taking a look at that, because that really isn't anything that has anything to do with any major crime. And I think you will agree that there are many more guns now than there ever has been. And I'm not saying that every stop produces a gun. In fact, of the stops, I think for a taillight out or a license plate expired, similar to the very unfortunate thing that happened in Brooklyn Center, very, very tragic thing. Generally, what you find is you find nothing. In fact, you could even be a good advocate to say, hey, you need your taillight fixed, please get it fixed. Have a nice day, give them some information, whatever. Community policing. We talk about community policing, and that's a great place to do it. It's also a dangerous place to approach, and I understand that. I did it for years. I understand that it is, but do you think that's the right direction to go? And I'm wondering how many guns we would actually miss and probably foil crime, if you will, by finding that, or how many drug investigations would go on the wayside. And then I want to finish up with recruitment for police officers and what the governor's doing there too as well. But if you could comment on that, please.
Commissioner Harrington.
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, none of the studies that I'm aware of connect that the equipment violation traffic stops to gun interdiction on a successful basis. Most of the studies that I've seen have said the directed patrol does have an effect on that, but those are cases where you have information and you are specifically directing the patrol activity and the stops to either a specific person or an area where you already have probable cause to believe that person is either carrying narcotics or carrying drugs. So I don't see the connection between what I would call the equipment violation style traffic stop and crime suppression. What I can tell you is that, for example, with the Minnesota State Patrol, they are very focused on distracted driving, intoxicated driving, and speed. Those are moving violations that we know have a direct and correlated connection to fatal crashes on the highway. And so we are very supportive of reducing the equipment violation traffic stops to a de minimis level, to putting them in a place where they really do belong, which is we should inform people of that they have a broken taillight and get them fix it. We should make sure they know that their plates are expired and have them get their plates. But I do not see that there's a connection between that and crime reduction. And so I'm very supportive of the House language moving forward to give us better ways of handling these minor traffic violations rather than having an officer do that. And in fact, I believe the conversation I've had with other subject matter experts that are traffic law enforcement experts actually supports that perspective, that we should do less of the low-level traffic stops and then give our officers the time to focus on speed and drunk driving and the distracted driving that's actually killing more people on our highways and on our streets.
So I'll just finish. So it's pretty clear that the administration is okay with allowing their state patrol to turn their head, I guess, and look the other way for equipment violations, as well as not having registration on their vehicle, which a lot of times, and you probably know this as well as I, that sometimes and most of the time they have no insurance in their car, and Minnesota law says you have to have that. But let me finish up, Commissioner, and I really appreciate the time here. Talking about officers and retention of officers, and I know I talked to chiefs and sheriffs most recently from various parts of the state, and as well as the training institutes up in Alexandria and other colleges in the state. And the lines are really depleting of people that want to get into this profession. And what they're seeing on the media, first of all, they should divide it in half and only look at a quarter of it for the actual truth. But it's making a big difference of the officers that when it comes to recruitment, and what are we going to get for officers that probably like your family member. I have two nephews that actually went into law enforcement. I'd like to think that I made made an influence on them to wanting to go into that. You're just not going to have that anymore, I don't think, Commissioner. And what is the administration going to be doing to help with recruitment of qualified people? And I guess I'm gonna stop with that. I do have various other questions, but I'll just leave it at that because I know there's other hands up. And thank you, Commissioner.
Commissioner Harrington.
Senator Ingebrigtsen, Chair Limmer, the Department of Public Safety and the Governor's Office is very aware of the issues around recruitment and also very aware of retention. At running both the VCA, State Patrol, and AGE, which all has sworn law enforcement officers, we're aware that there are challenges in recruiting the right people into the profession. And because of that, we have supported LEDO and which is the Law Enforcement Opportunities Group that has been very successful in getting young candidates that may not have not seen law enforcement as their primary career path, but have now decided that this is a great way for them to support their community. We did in the first 2 years of the department, we went out across the state to have a conversation about values-based or character-based policing with local agencies all over the state to talk about what is it that your local cities and communities want out of their police officers. And we are using that material to help frame the recruitment effort. What we're finding is that people want peace officers that they can trust, that they believe have moral courage, who can make good decisions, that they're empathetic, and that they care deeply. And I think we need to that means a different advertising push in some regards from the kind of the advertising that I came on, which was SWAT and more of the action-oriented advertising for peace officers. And what we're now looking for is people that care. And I'm looking for more of the cops that can work with the young and can work with the elderly and can work with victims of domestic violence. And so I think we are going to have to change our approach as we recruit. And we're going to also have to change our retention policies. I do appreciate that, frankly, that the legislature has helped us at the state level in working on salaries for state law enforcement, because we were really struggling to keep up with what the suburban agencies and the bigger city agencies could offer. And we were going to lose some people to those departments. So I do appreciate the support we've had in terms of the state patrol salary. And I think the BCA salary is also being worked on. And we appreciate that because we know that that does have an impact. But I think there's more to it than that. And I think you're correct to say that we are going to, in this day and age, have to do more with that. I will tell you, though, frankly, on a non-law enforcement side, I'm having the same conversation with my fire side, that firefighters and the volunteer firefighters that make up the majority of firefighters in greater Minnesota, we're really struggling getting young people that want to take on that kind of public service also. So I don't think it's just police. I think that we have much work to do in recruiting for the fire service, for EMS, and for police. And we're going to have to make sure that we're reaching out to the right people with the right backgrounds to be able to fill those positions. Just a real quick follow-up, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, Robertson.
Mr. Chair, thank you. And Commissioner, you and I have a very good idea what community policing is, and that is getting out of the car, talking to those 2 or 3 kids on the corner. You mentioned that, and you mentioned what a good success that is, having those kids flag you over later on and say, hey, something's going on over here, or what, this or that. And that's just the basic function of police, good community policing. Student resource officers, I mean, they're invaluable as I see it, getting a uniform in school. But how can we help, or how does the governor help, or how does the administration help? And you didn't touch on it a whole lot, but how are you going to help these major cities with this horrible amount of crime going on to be funded when again, they're talking about defunding? How do they expect any law enforcement officer to get out of the car and even communicate with people when all they're going to be doing is running after calls? And I can't emphasize enough the public safety here in the metro area and how it really seems to be going, quite frankly, unattended to. And I'm very concerned about that. And I'd like to hear your concerns and what the administration would, really like to do. You can throw some money at these programs and then they're fine. They're fine to get a hold of the kids. And I like that. Ethnic disparities. I'm not sure what that means when you're talking about juveniles, but we just need to deal with this crime because the criminals, as you know, the gangs, as you know, are sitting there wringing their hands and smiles on their faces when they know people are talking about, emptying those squad cars. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Thank you.
Commissioner Harrington, did you have any comment?
Mr. Chair, Senator Ingebrigtsen, I would say there are several things that are in our budget that speak directly to trying to speak to the crime. Among them are the work we want to do around mental health, because we know so many of the calls that police officers respond to are in fact mental health crisis calls. And if we were doing a better job with those calls at a community basis, we would have less calls for service that the police officers would have to handle repeatedly. If we do a better job on the juvenile justice issue, if we prevent more kids going into gangs or going into delinquent acts, we are going to reduce the volume of calls there. We appreciate the support for the school safety center, which we believe is an essential component in helping educate school districts about how to do more in that area. We really do believe that healthy communities are safer communities, and those healthy communities will see crime go down. And then on the emergency side of this, the work with the BCA and in some cases State Patrol being there to assist when asked for by local police departments, we believe that's also our budget does reflect our commitment to stand with Minneapolis, St. Paul, Duluth, Rochester, and all the departments across the state when they need additional assistance in whether it's in crime reduction strategies or crime prevention strategies. We think really we cannot afford to do just one. We have to do both.
Thank you, Commissioner. In listening to Senator Ingebrigtsen, I couldn't help but reflect on some of the comments I've heard around the Twin Cities area as well. I think he's accurate in picking out some of the issues, rising crime rate, and very much concerned about people, especially in Minneapolis, that want to defund police departments, reroute resources to other areas that they think might help. But nevertheless, you have a violent threat on the streets and it has to be met. That's a concern of mine. It's a concern of mine when prosecutors say they're not going to prosecute their definition of low-level crimes. And I'm finding that to be very concerning for the safety of our citizens as well. So that comes to mind as we have this larger conversation. The question of whether or not we prosecute carjackings or theft crimes that are considered low level and not prosecuted in the dollar amount of less than $30,000 to $35,000. Even in Maple Grove, $35,000 is a lot of money. And I'm just concerned that we as a prosecuting office does not respond to the threat of danger to citizens or to the property involved. I think we're going to move off this subject a little bit. I want to get to Senator Latz. And Senator Latz, I'm sorry that you've been waiting so long with your hand up, but let's move on to Senator Latz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I've been really pleased to listen to all of this conversation, and it's been enlightening in a lot of ways. Some helpful, I think, and some more distracting. I wanted, since Senator Ingebrigtsen just finished repeating the mantra about defunding police in Minneapolis, to emphasize that even as quickly as very shortly after it first surfaced, most members of the Minneapolis City Council clarified that what they were really referring to was realigning the funding that would go toward public safety initiatives in Minneapolis and not eliminating funding for the police department. And so I think repeating the phrases may have some advantages for some purposes, but they're not accurate nor helpful in the conversation about how we best handle law enforcement and public safety initiatives. We have general broad consensus that we need to put more funding toward mental health issues, that we should have co-responders or even first responders who are more expert in some of those areas, than necessarily law enforcement who have received 40 hours in CIT training responding to situations that maybe they end up being the escalating factor just by their very presence. So I think those are important discussions to have without the distraction of repeating phraseology that is unhelpful. I guess I'll say it that way. I initially raised my hand also because I wanted to respond to Senator Matthews. And Senator Limmer, you actually gave a good response, although I think you didn't quite realize it, because you talked about the importance of prevention. In the context of prevention, the governor's executive orders were aimed entirely at preventing the spread of a very deadly illness, virus that was causing and still causes deaths, serious illness, long-term health consequences, which we don't even have a full grasp on yet. Chair Becker-Finn put this quite accurately, which was the executive orders are the law. And in fact, if you read the executive orders, you understand, and per statute, it is accurate and it's true that a violation of the executive orders is a crime. And here, very disturbingly, we had the chair of the Civil Law Committee of the Minnesota State Senate essentially encouraging and supporting the commission of crimes in furtherance of some other agenda. And Mr. Chairman, I find that incredibly disturbing. What we say matters, and it may sound really good to some of the residents in greater Minnesota who haven't had family members die from COVID yet. But the fact is, if you break the law, there should be a consequence. And if you knowingly and intentionally flout it, there should be an even greater consequence. And the fact is, these establishments that were remaining open in violation of the governor's executive orders were putting their employees, who probably didn't have much of a choice about showing up into that work environment, and patrons who probably didn't have a great understanding of the threat of the virus at risk for not only minor flu-like symptoms, which is about as complete a disinformation campaign as I have ever heard, and which is constantly being repeated at upper echelons of the Minnesota Senate, but also they end up on heart-lung machines, they end up on respirators, they end up with long-term health effects like rapid heartbeats that come on at unexpected times as consequences of having had COVID. Many of them still living with those effects and will for many, many years. And so I just want to say I was really, really saddened to hear the civil law chairman not only essentially defend those who knowingly broke our criminal laws, but then also ask for sort of a blanket pardon to be issued to all of them, as if somehow that is a magic solution to encouraging compliance with law. And for the side of the aisle that often prides itself on defending criminal and law enforcement and so on, to carve out a certain segment of the community and to say, you know what, they should just get a pass because of economic hardship. Now, I believe that they had serious economic hardship, and I'm really sad that it came to that. But I, for one, would prefer to protect individuals' lives over the economic hardship. And there have been trillions of dollars made available to help businesses get through. Not all of them could. I understand that. It's been really hard on everyone. But I think we got to be awfully careful what we say here, because it may have some advantages in certain elements of our communities. but it's just really bad messaging to the whole state to say, you know what, if you're on the right side of the political issues, we're just going to promote giving you a pass and tell them not to, do any charges against you. And you know what, you can go ahead and break the criminal law. We just don't care because we agree with the other purposes for which you were breaking it. I don't think that's good for us to be promoting, Mr. Chairman. I had to say that in response to some of the comments I heard earlier today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator Latz. We have to recognize the schedule of Sheriff Fletcher right now. He's got some other commitments, and so I'm going to interrupt the discussion of Senator Harrington. And Commissioner Harrington, if you could hold with us, but Sheriff Fletcher needs to move on to his schedule for the day. And I think we're going to move into the discussion regarding VCETs. Those of you that have your hands up, I'll get back to you as soon as we go forward. I've written your names down that have your hands up at this time. So if you have questions for Sheriff Fletcher as we move along, it might be best to take your hands down now so I can at least know what question you may want to ask, but I will get back to you when we return. Sheriff Fletcher, welcome to our committee. Thank you for waiting with us. I hope you found our discussion interesting.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
I want to say one thing. Senator Fletcher once ran for Minnesota Senate at one time, 1986, and I did too. And we both lost that year. Sheriff Fletcher got gainful employment, and I've got a part-time job. so Sheriff Fletcher, welcome to our committee.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, thank you so much for all your work. I truly enjoyed the conversation, a lot of great ideas. And having been up there during the last few weeks of many sessions, I don't think I could do it. I really respect what you do up there day in, day out. It's a lot of work for a little pay. Let me just say I really enjoyed the conversation about prevention, intervention, and in our case, I think sometimes suppression. I've been a big advocate for prevention programs, and certainly with mental health, a lot of these intervention alternatives are critical now. But today I'd like to talk about a small piece of the puzzle, which is the suppression side. And as you know, in late 2019, we had a big crime surge in the metropolitan area. In particular, St. Paul saw a lot of shootings in July and August and September of 2019. And many of those incidents of assault and robberies were related to transit. And, Congresswoman McCollum was concerned about the transit issues as well. So Sheriff Hutchinson and I got together with some of our law enforcement partners and said, how can we impact what's happening on transit? And I think Chair Mariani, I think Morgan Fleming and Sheriff Hutchinson may have contacted you with a proposal at the beginning of 2020. But of course, with the pandemic and the shutdown really of light rail, those issues sort of went on the back burner. And this bill that you have in front of you was actually brought, I think, to both chairs in early 2020. We might have had a little more money in it at the time, but we really appreciate you taking a look at it this year, because here's the problem. A lot of the offenders that ride the transit move between several different municipalities. And what we really would like to do is coordinate our efforts between the 5 major agencies that are mentioned in the bill so that we have good information flow. And so we know who's traveling to where and who's committing the crime. And this is really just an effort to provide an incentive to have a VCET program dedicated to transit. And we have an East Metro VCET, we have a West Metro VCET, we have VCETs throughout the state. But what we don't have is a coordinated effort regarding crime on transit. And let's just be frank, Metro Transit does a great job, but they're not experts in gang activity and tracking career criminals and working on the violence side. So we think that St. Paul, Minneapolis, Hennepin, and Ramsey can provide a support network of information and target the most violent. We know that the number of real serious violent offenders that need to be targeted is a small number compared to our community. We can use prevention and intervention on so many others, but we would like to have the ability to coordinate our efforts regarding transit. And we know that as things open up, these transit issues are going to surface. And our job is to be ahead of the curve before they surface. And the public was really crying out for a safer transit system. A lot of people use it to go to Twins games, go to Vikings games, and we need to assure them that we have a law enforcement component. So I'll shut up and stand for any questions.
Any questions for Sheriff Fletcher? Chair Mariani?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Sheriff, good to see you. And before I say anything else, I just want to thank you for your service to my county. And I also want to acknowledge what you just said. And I do remember those conversations, and COVID did certainly break off, what looked like some promising, potential work. And so, just so that you know that I share both your desire for safer local transit, and also the particular approach in which Morgan would engage with me and your counterpart Hutchinson, Sheriff Hutchinson, were sharing, which was a really, as I understood it, a real comprehensive approach. I think and I think you've demonstrated this in our county alone, that there's almost, my words, sort of a two-pronged approach here, that was on the table back then. One was certainly the enhanced ability for law enforcement to be able to communicate with one another, share intel, et cetera, precisely because of the mobility issue. And on top of that, coupling it along with intervention. So in other words, as I understood it, you're collecting data, you're understanding who's who, what's motivating you, et cetera. And I think this probably comes from just your experience in Ramsey County, Sheriff, understanding that strong interventions need to go along with that kind of identification. So what can we do is what I understood back then. What can we do in terms of opening up opportunities for some of these folks who are skating pretty close, to harmful behavior, even those engaged in some harmful behavior. I think what I heard is that what you and Sheriff Hutchinson understood is that there were very to little, no connections happening for these young, often young people, often young men. And so that's a vision that I can absolutely support. I think the House understands the importance of, and I said it earlier, with Commissioner Harrington, the importance of a quote unquote balanced approach where you're really putting together both, some very strong law enforcement intel, presence, interventions, along with powerful social interventions that can open up opportunities. I think Morgan was talking about even, bringing in, there were apparently conversations with local businesses and corporations, who were looking at providing, training and job, type of opportunities, et cetera. So having said all that, my question relative to using a VCET vehicle is, it's my understanding that VCETs don't typically operate this way, that they're more about one component and less about the other component. The other component really being that, intervention, prevention, opportunity opening, set of activities. So perhaps you can just share a little bit with us, how you envision using a VCET mechanism would be able to do both of those, if you will. And of course, I'm assuming that that's still the idea. But if you can just share a little bit about what your vision is relative to that comprehensive approach using a VCET mechanism.
Chair Fletcher.
Mr. Chair, Chair Mariani, a great question, a great issue on how we go about doing this. I would say that law enforcement strongly supports prevention and intervention. We recognize the mental health, the drug addiction, the social, educational, and employment issues that are there, and we're big supporters of that. In fact, just as a reminder, when we eliminated the Minnesota Gang Strike Force and formed the violent crime enforcement teams, we specifically put in that legislation that a percentage of the dollars would have to go to prevention-related programming. And so every VCET in the state of Minnesota is required to have a percentage of that money partnered up with some form of nonprofit that does prevention work. You know, that figure could always be tweaked, but if you take a look at the legislation, it's clear that that's a big component. Now, I know there's other legislation regarding funding of ambassadors or, and again, mental health workers to partner with police. I think we can work all that together. But when we looked at what's the best way to do a multi-agency approach to Metro Transit and how do we best get our handle on the movement of the serious offenders, we just came up that VCET was the best tool that the state had. And we looked at a lot of different options, creating new Metro task forces, but this seemed like the logical way. But we would support any additional efforts. We'd love to be able to refer people with addiction because, you know, working in this field, we're going to work closely with many in the homeless field. There's no question. We've ridden the trains many times, and you know this becomes a home for many of our homeless during the winter. And a lot of them have mental health and drug addiction issues. So you know we can't just turn a blind eye to that. We want to help them not become random victims or random suspects. But the focus of this VCET would be to the career criminals that ride the trains and victimize a number of people. And but that doesn't mean we wouldn't continue to help divert other less serious offenders, if that makes some sense, Chair Mariani.
Yeah.
Chair Mariani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Sheriff. I do concur with you that while suppression, if you will, is important, it's not the only thing that we should be doing. And what we've tried to do with the House bill, similar to what Commissioner Harrington shared in their approach, is to make sure that we've got good resources being applied in both suppression, if you will, and intervention and prevention work. And you know, one of my concerns is that the Senate bill before us does very little, if anything, in terms of new prevention investments and appropriations. Perhaps this conversation and the work division that you're trying to lay out might help to move us along, you know, in terms of having, you know, a strong, balanced approach. But I do want to again, you know, commend you and thank you, you know, for the vision that you've been laying out and also doing, you know, within your own resources, you know, as a sheriff of our county. And I think I'm really encouraged that that there's a strong, measured approach that's really based on, you know, the reality on the ground here. And the reality is that we need to interdict and intervene to stop harmful practice. At the same time that we need to intervene to create opportunities so that others don't get tempted into engaging in those kind of harmful practices. So I want to thank you for that vision.
Thank you.
Chair Mariani, the whole concept of using a VCET in this regard, it's a rather modest amount of money when you really look at it, and it certainly isn't designed to cure all the problems or have a universal approach. It's focused on keeping the light rail lanes safe. We all know that the light rail system over the years has been somewhat controversial. And to make it truly successful, it has to be a safe system. and it has to be safe for riders. And yet, especially in the summer months, it becomes quite an avenue for illicit or illegal behavior. And it hurts the ridership. People don't trust it. And we have to make sure it's safe. It's absolutely vital that we do. Having this for 2 years to see what happens, I think is a modest approach. And certainly it's not designed to cover every single problem. VCETs aren't designed to do that necessarily, but they are designed to react to a criminal threat. And I think this particular proposal is one with a modest investment. It's my hope that we can get light rail considered safe by the general public and we boost our ridership. I think the Met Council would be interested in a much safer system, and then we can encourage it to really be used to its full potential. I see that Representative Becker-Finn wants to join us in this.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I was glad that you put the VCETs on the agenda today, based on something that came up the other day about regarding VCETs in relation to the problem of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I think my question might actually be better directed at Superintendent Evans, but it is regarding VCETs. I know that that's kind of where they're housed under DPS. So first, I'm just wondering, I'm guessing I know the answer, but maybe not. I know we're all very busy, but I'm wondering how many of the conferees here have read the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women Task Force report. And if you haven't read that yet, it is over 100 pages. But if you start on page 119, it's only about 16 pages of the recommendations that came out of that task force. And I know that Superintendent Evans was also a member of that task force, so knows the work well. And the top, they're calling them, there's 20 mandates of things that they are suggesting that came out of that task force of what can be done about this problem. And so I know this wasn't heard in the Senate, but so folks kind of remember, even though Native women only make up 1% of the population, we make up 8% of the murders of women in Minnesota. And so, you know, we know that it's a problem, and that's why we have this task force. And so the first suggestion from the task force is, with tribal consultation, create a missing and murdered Indigenous women or missing and murdered Indigenous relatives office to provide or support the following activities. Hold the Minnesota legislature and state agencies accountable for implementing the mandates in this report and develop additional recommendations to address MMIW injustice. Facilitate further research to refine the mandates in this report and to assess the potential efficacy, feasibility, and impact of all recommendations. Develop tools and processes to evaluate the implementation and impact of missing and murdered Indigenous women-related efforts. Facilitate technical assistance for local and tribal law enforcement agencies during active MMIW cases. Conduct and report on the results of case reviews for the following types of MMIW cases: cold cases for missing Indigenous people, death investigation review for cases of Indigenous people ruled as suicide or overdose under suspicious circumstances, and prosecution and sentencing review for cases where a perpetrator committed a violent and/or exploitative crime against an Indigenous woman, girl, or two-spirit person, or when the perpetrator is a repeat offender. Ensure legislation includes the necessary provisions to create access to the data needed to conduct these reviews, review sentencing guidelines for MMIW-related crimes, coordinate efforts with stakeholders, including 11 tribal nations, and work with relevant DPS divisions to maintain communication and coordinate as relevant with the Bureau of Indian Affairs Cold Case Office through Operation Lady Justice and other federal efforts, as well as efforts in neighboring states and Canada. I am wondering if VCETs are able to do any of these things that are listed in the first mandate coming out of the MMIW task force report.
Representative Becker-Finn, I did raise the subject of using VCET money to pursue investigations of MMIW subjects. I thought it might be a good use of that Instead of creating a government bureaucracy, I thought, let's open it up and get our law enforcement teams to get on that right away, rather than not fund it for that purpose. So the VCETs have become very useful, and they expand over a large area that has shared jurisdictions, which I think would cover the areas around MMIW subjects. You made a reference to reading the report that MMIW Task Force came up with. I have read it. And I'd also like to bring your attention to the Department of Public Safety's report on the use of VCETs. It's dated May 6, 2021. It's regarding the 2020 Violent Crime Coordinating Council report. And they actually resulted in, and this is over 70 counties in Minnesota, staffed by more than 200 investigators. The VCETs made 2,195 drug arrests last year and recovered 880 firearms, which is really quite amazing for a well-defined dollar amount. If we could take VCET money and direct it toward the investigation of missing and murdered women in this state, I think it would be a tremendous use of dollars. And our VCET reference is not necessarily, maybe it is defined, but we could reconsider the definition and the direction of where that money could go. But nevertheless, I wanted to get our attention back on Sheriff Fletcher. I don't think he was done with his question and answer time. I know you're trying to get the subject before us, and we have a number of days to do that as we consider our budget. We're still waiting for our budget targets. I'm hoping a target was that we were going to get those targets today. I'm anxious to hear that progress, if any. But I think there's optional ways to direct our attention in the right direction. If there's murdered and missing women in the state, we need to know about it, and we need to react to it as immediately as possible. In the case of the light rail and the VCETs regarding light rail enforcement, there is an immediate problem there, and it has continued over recent years in the metropolitan area. Regarding light rail, I have been told that ridership is down because of that fear. And I think Sheriff Fletcher, as well as other law enforcement agents in the metropolitan area, have a very feasible plan here. And of course, it's in the Senate,
Mr. Chair.
It's not in the House, but we'll consider all of this as we proceed in the next few days. Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, but respectfully, you brought up VCETs in relation to missing and murdered Indigenous women. And right now, what is happening is that you're trying to redirect away from a Native woman telling you right now, asking a question to the superintendent of the BCA regarding this effort. And I would really appreciate an answer from Superintendent Evans about whether VCETs can do these things. And I want to say that law enforcement was part of this task force. We can play dueling task force reports, but this is a real task force with a real problem that is an immediate problem. And I think this is the place to have this discussion. And, if we're going to tie VCETs to the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women, then I think it's entirely appropriate for me to ask Superintendent Evans if VCETs would do any of these things that a missing and murdered Indigenous women office would do for the people of Minnesota. And so I would really appreciate the opportunity to have Superintendent Evans at least answer that question. I understand you want to get us in a different direction, but I know Sheriff Fletcher, and I know he knows this is an important issue as well. And I think we have time for a couple minutes from Superintendent Evans to at least respond to my question.
I welcome our conversation, Representative Becker-Finn. And just keep in mind, VCETs are funded through OJP and not through the BCA. Superintendent Evans.
Mr. Chair and Representative Becker-Finn, I'd be happy to answer the question. I was a proud member of both the Missing and Murdered Women's Indigenous, or the task force, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women's Task Force, and also I'm a member of the Violent Crime Coordinating Council that oversees our VCETs across Minnesota. To answer the question specifically, as outlined in the report, the VCETs, certainly in their current format, would not take on many of those tasks. As was, represented in the discussion that you have all been having, our VCETs primarily are focused on drug and gang investigations across Minnesota, which certainly has a component of some of the issues that were outlined in our report and the work that task force did. And so there's certainly a component related to that. Primarily, many of the issues that we did work on, as outlined in that in-depth report that we worked so diligently on, was really related to some of the complexities that are outlined in these investigations between our tribal nations, as was noted, that are 11 independent sovereign nations across Minnesota, and how they interact with our local law enforcement, whether it be their tribal police department, sheriff's offices, and then the roles such as the BCA plays across Minnesota. So to answer the question, the VCETs are currently not in a position where they would focus on much of that work that's outlined either in that office or in that. It certainly is a role that could be expanded if the legislature were to task those task forces, but it's not something that they currently focus on. But again, it's something that would be under the purview of all of you as policymakers.
Sheriff Fletcher, Representative Becker-Finn mentioned your name. Did you have any comment regarding this?
Well, I think Superintendent Evans outlines it properly. What direction the VCETs take is a policy issue addressed by the legislature. We're not opposed to working on any particular criminal activity, and the duties and responsibilities of the VCETs are outlined in statute. I mean, there could certainly be an insertion if necessary to determine what other areas we might work on. That's option one. Option two, of course, is the earmark funding for that, which becomes a little more problematic in that most of these VCETs want to stay able to do a broad range of different activities. But if the legislature decides to insert that investigative responsibility, I'm sure these VCETs would take that on seriously. So it's really a policy issue as to which money is spent on what issue.
Yeah, the whole subject of using a VCET in place of an office for MMIW, I raised in an open discussion on the Senate floor. And it was more of trying to solve a problem with available funds. And the VCET seemed to be an appropriate category because quite often in this area, we've had suspicion that people that are missing may have been pushed into sex trafficking. There has been a suspicion of whether it's somehow connected to cartels that also involve drugs. And certainly with any of those categories, it also involves the categories of guns as well. And looking at the past report from 2020, it seems like the VCET seemed to focus on illicit drug arrests and the recovery of over 880 firearms. So I thought it would be a good blend at the same time. And it's not a part of that specific purpose is not a part of this budget in the Senate or in the House, but it's something to consider as an option plan. Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And while I appreciate the work that VCETs may be capable of doing, my purpose in reading out what an MMIW office could do, none of that. I mean, I could read it again, but I won't. But that wasn't about the investigation. That wasn't about what violent crime enforcement teams do. It's all the other things that go into an office. And so I will note, to get us back to the spreadsheet that, the Senate has $2 million set aside for VCETs. And the ask of the governor and what the House position is on the MMIW or MMIR Indigenous Relatives Office is $1 million. So I mean, there's room there to fund the office and fund VCETs. So as I said, as I mentioned the other day, you know, the whole point of having the task force was to have impacted people talk about what would work and what would help. And they came forward with this report that listed out these things. And I mean, we can think that we know better than them, but we don't. And so I really would encourage folks to look closely at those recommendations. And while VCETs may be helpful in some scenarios, they are not a replacement for a missing and murdered Indigenous relatives office. And so I hope that all the conferees can take that very seriously, because this is an immediate concern. We have, at any given moment, there are dozens of missing and murdered, Indigenous relatives within our state, dating back to 2012. At any given time, at least 27 people are missing. And so I could name their names right now, but I won't do that today. But it is an immediate problem. Here's a solution. We could do both. I don't think we need to replace a very important recommendation coming out of this task force with focus on guns and drugs. It's great that they're able to do that work, but that isn't what the focus is, and that isn't what a missing and murdered Indigenous women office would accomplish.
Well, I believe there are two separate targets here. The one proposal is to focus on the safety of light rail. And area metropolitan law enforcement has suggested this in this narrow regard. It's part of the VCET proposal. And the MMIW certainly is another one. And so Sheriff Fletcher, is the growing problem on light rail, is it reflective of the growing crime problem in the metropolitan area?
Well, no doubt. I mean, the statistics regarding increased violence, assaults, robberies, carjacking in the metro since August of 2019 are very troubling. And as the light rail opens up, we expect that crime problem will manifest itself on the light rail. And we really want to be ahead of the curve here before that starts, with some additional presence, and make sure we take our intelligence, our knowledge that we have as local law enforcement agencies, and help the Metro Transit be able to identify those individuals that are causing the most problem. And it really is problematic that transit deals with individuals when they're on the train or on the platform. And most of the intel regarding their activity is when they're not on the train or on the platform, because these offenders move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, from transit to non-transit. So yes, we think it's going to be a problem. Obviously, what you've seen, both cities are on pace for record murder rates again already this year. St. Paul, of course, tied their record last year. But in addition to the murder rates, the number of gun shootings, I mean, actual discharge of weapons, is a huge problem for us. So, we're here to say that timing is good to get ahead of this before summer hits.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions regarding the VCET proposal on the light rail issue? Chair Mariani.
Thank you. Chairman Limmer. Just a couple things several things very quickly. One, while I certainly recognize the challenges that my city and my neighbor city to the west of us challenge, and in fact, our suburban communities, I do want to say a couple things very quickly, because I'm a little, frankly, disturbed by the conversation that seems to attempt to isolate crime issues to only one part of the state and not to the other. And there's, quite frankly, a bit of a contradictory thing happening here, because we're talking about funding VCETs in response to that. There's 21 of them in 7 counties across the state. They employ 200 investigators that span 120 agencies. many of those, the bulk of those are not in the Twin Cities. I think we should be tending to those VCETs properly. So I'm not begrudging that, but the contradiction seems to be that, well, there's a problem in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and so we should focus, all our law enforcement investments there. And yet the proposal is for a VCET, investment, which is, statewide. There's presence of VCETs throughout the state. We held hearings in the House. We spent a good solid week focused exclusively on Greater Minnesota. And I didn't hear from anyone, prosecutors, sheriffs, community members, police chiefs tell us that there aren't issues of crime that they don't need to deal with. And so I think it's really important that we watch, how we frame this issue if we're going to engender, the trust of the public in the decisions that we make. There are challenges all throughout our state. And I think our job as legislators is to fund and appropriate and equip, statewide systems to be able to respond, to those wherever they may exist. I don't not welcome Chair Limmer's suggestion to look at VCETs as a possible way in which we can respond to the MMIW challenge. I think that's part of legislating. You put out ideas, and then you do that creatively, and then you explore those to see whether or not it might be a good idea. The little bit I know about VCETs and the work of the task force and these conversations, however, increasingly leads me to agree with Chair Becker-Finn that perhaps not the best vehicle for us to respond to what this task force created for us as a guidance for enhancing public safety in the state of Minnesota. I just, don't see the deep competency of VCETs relative to sex trafficking issues particular. We do have vehicles which, we under-resource in our state when it comes to sex trafficking. And so the House proposal does some very strong investments, to combat sex trafficking in an effort to at least get that up to the same level as what we're investing with VCETs, which are appropriately responding to narcotics and gangs and violent crime. So I want us to, listen and be careful about where those appropriations are going to be made. And I'm not convinced that the VCET appropriation for the issues that the MMIW is bringing up is the best place to do that. But I do have a question for the sheriff. He's still here. Sheriff, so the Senate is proposing a $1 million a year investment in VCETs. And again, there's 21 of these, spread out across the state. What would you, and an estimate is fine, what would you estimate be the need from that appropriation relative to what you're envisioning to do here in the Twin Cities?
Sheriff Fletcher.
Mr. Chair, Chairman Mariani, I think obviously the need is great. I think when we originally brought the proposal, we were thinking $1 million for a Metro Transit, a VCET, half of that $2 million. But we recognize the legislative process, and we think that the 250,000 proposed will at least get us coordinating and working together, and that's a good starting place. I do want to say I think there's great commitment on behalf of the local law enforcement to do more without compensation. And Chair Mariani, you're correct. I mean, I love this town, and last thing I want to do is create any perception, but I also have to deal with reality. And, we have a pretty good community outreach team. Reverend Daryl Spence, who I know is on it. We would bring our additional resources to the transit, riding those trains in a semi-ambassador role. There are so many street boots on the ground outreach workers available, KG Wilson, Mr. Pollard. There are a lot of great people that could help us in this effort. And we'd like to bring them in as partners as well. And I know there's been a lot of discussion on how to do that, but they need to be partnered with a law enforcement agency so they can safely do this, and we can impart, data practices, information to them as to who might be the problem on the train. So, this is really an idea to be focused on the most serious offenders, and then look for alternative treatments, et cetera, for the ones that are not. But, obviously we could certainly use for the transit more than the 250 allotted, but, I'll leave the discretion of how the money is best spent to you who work many, many more hours than me. I have very little knowledge of Senator Becker-Finn's report there, but I know she does great work. So how it's divvied up is really in your lap.
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Sheriff, thank you for that. And you're quite self-humbling. You're on the ground. We look to you, for good guidance. And I do want to echo something you said, and I do know Daryl Spence, good man, good community member. And pleased that you're working with him and the others. Earlier we talked about, we described community policing as, getting out of the squad car and, interacting with the citizens that they're in charge of helping to protect. And I think that is true. That image, alone, just of, being in the same, level and space of having regular interactions with, regular citizens is a part of community policing. We spent quite a bit of time in our committee a couple of years ago diving real deep into the fuller aspects of community policing. And I think, Sheriff, you just articulated a critical component of that, which is, yes, it is about getting out of the squad cars. And, yes, to the commissioner, it is about actually walking, those streets and stopping at the local businesses, et cetera. And it's what you said as well, which is, and it's about being able to interface with active citizens who may even be trained, or in some cases, I know this is happening, are providing training for our peace officers, about being able to interact effectively, with the very communities in which these individuals live in. So I'm really encouraged by that vision, Sheriff, of what a full community policing approach means. And one of the things that we're trying to do, certainly in the House proposals and on the spreadsheet, is to make sure that we're making investments precisely in those kind of dynamics, the ones that you just described. And I know the executive branch is also proposing that in a different way than the House is. I think that there is a powerful coming together that's being informed both by law enforcement and by community members about creating, this ability to have those powerful dynamics so that you're not just having to depend, Sheriff, on Daryl Spence just happen to have, an extra hour, to be able to join your officers in transit vigilance or whatever, but actually having the resources so that they can do that, not just over and above, whatever work that they're doing in order to put food on the table. So I just want to really build off of what you said and by way of that, really highlight the approach that the House has made in terms of those kind of investments. And perhaps there is a way in which, we can match those with what you're hoping to be able to accomplish, through perhaps through a VCET, approach. I do think it's important that we're funding communities and we're funding local law enforcement simultaneously. And so one of the things I'm going to be balancing is how much do we fund, state agencies as opposed to how much do we fund our locals. And I think we can find the right equilibrium. And so I appreciate you, bringing your vision of how we might be able to do that. So I'm hearing about 250,000 of the, I think is what you said, would be meaningful relative to the $1 million or $2 million, proposed appropriation here.
Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Chair Mariani. Sheriff Fletcher, do you have a closing comment?
Yeah, good. I'll move on. Yeah, I do want to say the importance of the VCET concept here is to open the door for local agencies to help transit. If there's no organization that opens the door to make it a partnership, we leave transit on their own, and it really isn't fair to do that to them. So these additional resources of outreach workers that we have, that St. Paul has, the Johnny Howards of the world at St. Paul, we can bring some additional outreach workers to bear and to help in this effort. But it'll really feel like we're not on ground that we should be on unless there is a VCET that says it's okay for local agencies to help transit on transit. So, and the last thing I want to say, I know you're going to discuss fentanyl. I want to thank Bob Schmall. And as you know, I lost a son to opioid overdose on his 26th birthday, and anything you can do to help reduce that. You saw that report where our opioid deaths are up 27%. They're not opioid overdose deaths. And I hope when this COVID breaks, we can really get serious about helping families that are in need. So thank you for your work, everyone.
Thank you, Sheriff. I'm watching the clock right now, and I think we're going to have to move directly into the fentanyl discussion. We have some guests, too, that have limited time slots. So we're going to move into that. And I would like to open the testimony regarding the fentanyl issue in Minnesota and the danger it contributes. We have with us St. Louis County Attorney Mark Rubin and Dr. Charlie Resnick from the Hennepin Healthcare. So I think what I'd like to do is start out with County Attorney Rubin. Welcome to the committee. And if you'd like to start with your testimony, please go forward. Oh, and we also have Bob Small from our County Attorney Association in the wings for any technical assistance as well. So County Attorney Rubin.
Thank you, Senator Limmer, and thank you, members of this committee here. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thank you for considering this important issue. My heart goes out to Sheriff Fletcher. I cannot believe all the people that are in my life. Just within the last couple of weeks, we've had cases where people who you wouldn't expect are dying of overdoses. So, and when I testified earlier, and one of the things you said today, Senator Limmer, you said our communities deserve safety. Okay, that's why I'm here. And Representative Mariani, you talk about, you want to make sure that we're taking care of people who are addicted, the vulnerable people in our society. I come to you today because that's what I want to do. That's what the County Attorney Association wants to do. There's a segment of our population that is extremely vulnerable because they are addicted. How it started, different stories from many different people, but there is a segment that is, they're addicted. They need to take drugs to feed their addiction. And the sad part is that there's a segment of our population that thinks it's for profit, that is feeding that need, but they're doing it in a deceptive way. Fentanyl is such a potent drug. You've all heard about it. The problem with fentanyl, the bottom line, I'll discuss a little bit later, is you can't cut it equally. In other words, somebody is going to die. Someone's going to get an overdose. I think it's 3 grams of fentanyl is lethal. And all we're asking is that fentanyl be put on par with heroin, which is a 10-gram threshold for first degree. Okay? 3 grams is lethal. And if you have 10 grams of fentanyl, you're not using it, you're dealing it, you're selling it. And the sad part is you're not selling it to somebody who's not addicted necessarily. You're selling it to a vulnerable person. So we have this segment of the population that wants to take advantage of this. I'm so proud here in St. Louis County and across Minnesota, we have drug courts. And people ask, well, are you taking care of those who are addicted or just in possession of drugs? We certainly are. We defer prosecution for first-time possession. We have drug courts. We have our Duluth Police Department has an informal deferred prosecution. And we have diversion programs. We have treatment programs. We are trying what we can. Last time I testified, I think Representative Mariani, you asked me, are there other things we could do? You know, and boy, and I was been racking my brain. We've tried community awareness. We, remember the old days of the DARE program, and is that working? Maybe. I mean, there's some success to that. We're trying to ask people, and we're getting publicity. The Duluth News Tribune, this is the April 17th Sunday edition. A phenomenal job by Tom Olson. He's one of our local writers here. He titles it, "It's a Bad Thing." Big headlines. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't read the paper anymore. But this is trying to get the awareness, and he covers the statistics. Even like in St. Louis County, we had 61 overdose deaths last year, according to our medical examiner, Dr. Quinn Strobel. 30 or 41 of those involve fentanyl or one of the analogs. So that's, I can assure you, those who died from that didn't know what they were putting into their body. They didn't take it because this is an intentional suicide. They took it to get high, to feed an addiction, and they were deceived. If I can help that, if my fellow county attorneys, and if you can help that, do away with that and try to provide some disincentive to those who are putting this garbage in otherwise dangerous drugs, because they put it in heroin, they blend it in with methamphetamine, and get this, we had a case this fall where a young man with an addiction problem driving on a 2-lane highway north of Duluth, crosses the center line, hits a van head on, kills a 42-year-old woman. His blood alcohol is 0.03, legal, okay? He said he had been smoking some marijuana at a party. We get a blood draw. We test his blood, BCA. Thanks to John Harrington. Test his blood, and what do they find in the blood? Fentanyl. So in all likelihood, the marijuana he smoked was laced with fentanyl, and we're seeing that. And that's so even as we look to this movement to legalize marijuana, there are those who want to sell this potent or hot marijuana, whatever they want to call it, because that's more attractive to the addict. Okay, and as far as, what else can we do? I wish there was something else, because in the 2 weeks after this article is out in the Duluth paper, we had a young man in his early 20s in Proctor, overdose death, fentanyl, and 2 of the analogs that show up the system. Just this last Sunday, I was up at a funeral, and this really gets personal. This is Madeline Blotkovich, 21 years old, the daughter of one of our prosecutors, 30-plus year prosecutor up in Hibbing, Jeff Blotkovich. Addicted, vulnerable, struggling, died of an overdose, and the tests aren't back yet, but she had a couple of what appeared to be oxy pills in her pocket, and she died very quickly. It was within a matter of a few hours, and when there was nobody with her at that time. More likely than not, this was probably some of the illegal oxy. The DEA tells us it's all over Minnesota. VCA confirms this too. They make these fake oxy pills, and they put fentanyl in it, and so that it provides even a greater high or whatever. And here's the saddest part, everyone, and I'll close with this, I think, because we're doing what we can, but here's how bad this appetite is. I am told by law enforcement that when they hear that somebody dies, of an overdose because it was too potent, some addicts will actually be drawn. They'll want to know who the dealer was so they can buy from that dealer because they want to flirt. They wanted something that's so powerful. But of course, they don't think they're going to be the one that dies. So it's like a Russian roulette type of thing. We're doing what we can. I can't urge you strongly enough to do what you can. And again, if there's a better idea, we're all for it. But I can't think, after 43 years of being a prosecutor, I can't think of anything else that would be as effective. So thank you very much.
Thank you, County Attorney. I know there's hands up, but I'd like to get to Dr. Resnikoff first, and then we'll get into the question and answer. Dr. Resnikoff, are you with us? There he is.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us today. Please proceed.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the Public Safety and Judiciary Conference Committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is Charlie Resnikoff. I'm an addiction medicine specialist at Hennepin Healthcare, and I treat opioid addiction at HCMC and in Lonsdale, Minnesota. This week, the Minnesota Department of Health released statistics showing a 30% increase in drug overdose deaths in 2020. Synthetic opioids, including particularly fentanyl and fentanyl analogs, drove this rise in death. They were involved in 82% of all opioid deaths statewide this year. I'm going to show you a graphic in a minute. In 2020, 56% of opioid drug seizures were fentanyl. So when a Minnesotan thinks that they're using heroin, they're probably actually using fentanyl. And borrowing a prescription pill from a friend, one likely gets a counterfeit pill containing fentanyl. Opioid users often do not know that they're even taking fentanyl. The problem with fentanyl, as you heard, is that it is many, many times more potent than pharmaceutical opioids or heroin. If an opioid user thinks that they're taking an average dose of heroin or just a Percocet, they might actually be taking a lethal dose of fentanyl. And so we see fentanyl overdoses every day at Hennepin County Medical Center. Fentanyl overdoses affect rural, suburban, and metropolitan areas of the state. It affects people of all ages, genders, and races. And I'll show you a graphic on that in a second. While everyone is affected by fentanyl, African Americans die from overdoses 2.5 times more than whites in Minnesota. Native Americans die from overdoses 7.5 times more than whites in Minnesota. And I have seen myself, fentanyl is a rising problem in our Somali communities. So it is really crucial that we give all communities tools to lower the death from fentanyl. We advocate for a tool that a number of other states and local governments have safely used in the battle against fentanyl. And that tool is fentanyl test strips. Okay, so if you take a drug and you dissolve it in water and you put a fentanyl test strip in the water, a line will appear to indicate if fentanyl is present in the drug. And that knowledge will help users be more careful. It is as simple as a home pregnancy test. And a study showed that when you give drug users these strips, 80% of them will use the strips and they will use that knowledge to behave differently, usually more safely. And just as important as giving drug users the knowledge about what drug they're actually using, offering fentanyl test strips also is important because it's a form of outreach. It helps build a bridge between the treatment community and the drug users. It opens a conversation that helps users understand their treatment options. In addition, fentanyl test strips could be used by first responders. Fentanyl test strips could be used by community workers or even parents. If you find an unknown substance in your house and you want to test it to know what it is to protect your family or your community. In short, fentanyl test strips are currently considered illegal drug paraphernalia, but they do not help people use drugs. They help people not use drugs by telling them what the drug actually is, that it's a danger to them. Exempting fentanyl test strips from the definition of drug paraphernalia makes sense both from a public safety point of view and also from a policy perspective. So thank you very much for your time. Thanks for the ability to talk to you today. And I'm, of course, available for any questions. I'm going to quickly show you one graphic. And the top graph shows the death rate from opioids. And the green line is the 7-county metro, and the purple line is the greater Minnesota area. And of course, there are, fewer people. This is not per capita. This is total number of deaths. And the bottom graph shows what people are dying from. And that orange line is the synthetic opioids, which is fentanyl. And it's way up higher than the other drugs. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Doctor. We'll open it up for questions right now. I believe Representative Frazier is first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question to Mr. Rubin. Mr. Rubin, can you tell me, Dr. Resnick just talked about data and what it showed and how these test strips could work, because I totally believe in the holistic approach and preventative method. Can you talk about the data that you have, or research, or anything that supports what your position is in reducing the fentanyl in the community?
Representative Frazier and everyone, I mean, the data I have is the fact that it's increasing so much. So every year now, the amount of fentanyl, or the percentage of cases, of overdose cases involving fentanyl, has increased. And we believe it's because people don't know what they're getting. And then there are also those who want to capitalize and make money on this. As far as data that would show you that this is, is this one tool? I think the test strips are a good idea. I think making certain that it's, dealers need to be accountable. And, we always say, well, laws aren't going to make any difference. Well, my goodness, you guys all believe in it. I believe that laws make a difference. Otherwise, you wouldn't be having this discussion today. Okay, so we have to feel, if we do treat those who deal fentanyl the same way we would a heroin dealer, I think that's all we really want to do with the language in this bill. So I wish I had more data for you, Representative Fraser, but that's what I can tell you from the real life experience.
Mr. Chair. You're muted, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, you're muted.
Must be my age or something, or I'm shell-shocked from this legislative session. Maybe it's both. Thank you for the guidance, Representative Fraser. Representative Mahler.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I, definitely agree that the overdose and the increased use of opioids is really alarming. I had the benefit of serving on the Behavioral Health Committee this year, and I know that we had a lot of really robust discussions about substance use disorder and increasing treatment bed space. And I know that those discussions are continuing in the HHS committee. And I also am really intrigued by the idea of test strips and the number of people, it sounds like, will use these if they're available. But I also am curious about the fentanyl bill, and the addition of the penalty to the possession only, not just the sale crime, which as a prosecutor, I know that sale includes possession with intent to sell. And so just the straight up possession crimes. And I guess my question is for the doctor, and I think he said that most people who are using fentanyl don't actually know they're taking it. And so what concerns me is criminalizing those people who are possessing it and not necessarily aware that they are using fentanyl. So if the doctor could just answer that question, I think that would be very helpful.
Dr. Resnikoff, would you like to answer that? It sounds like it's more a prosecutorial question to one of our attorneys, but perhaps the doctor can give us some insight.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for that question. I agree. Well, there's a couple important things you got at in that question. It is true that very often people do not know the drug that they have in their possession, whether or not it contains fentanyl, and there may have been misled. Increasingly, people are just selling fentanyl as fentanyl. And there is a lot of awareness that fentanyl is going around out there. But even when you know you have fentanyl, you don't know how potent it is. But at any rate, it's a very good point. I think I was very heartened to hear the prior testimony that drug court is a priority, because incarceration without treatment for people with addiction does actually worsen the overdose death rate, because when they are released from incarceration, they return to drug use and they die. So to your point, incarcerating drug addicted individuals without offering them treatment puts them at risk of death upon release from incarceration. So it's very important that we're offering treatment services. And besides that, yeah, I think the threshold for possession being high enough so that I'm commenting on a criminal justice issue, I should be cautious, but the comment earlier was that the threshold for possession was high enough to be only someone who's trafficking. The final thing that and I don't know that, but I'm trusting the prior testimony. The final thing that I would say in response to you is, while this isn't the intent of the fentanyl test strips, someone who is in possession of drugs and might be prosecuted for that possession can test it to know what crime they're breaking. And that's my editorial on that. They at least have the opportunity to know this is fentanyl. There's a heightened crime attached to this drug, so I need to be careful with what I'm doing with this drug. Not just using, but also even having it in possession. So those are answers, but your points are very good. Thank you for the question.
Representative Muller, did you have any further question?
I don't, and I'm fine if either Mr. Rubin or Mr. Small want to address the addition of the possession and not just in the sale crimes for the increased penalties.
Yeah, which prosecutor would like to answer the question regarding possession charges of someone who may not know that they have fentanyl in their actual possession? Is there a difficulty in prosecuting, or is it a misplaced direction?
No, I think Senator, I'll address this.
Mr. Rubin, County Attorney Rubin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, I mean, you look at the amounts even for second degree possession that is in the proposed statute. I think is it still 25 grams? Am I correct, I think, in the language? Okay, 25 grams of fentanyl. And you've heard from the doctor and you've heard from me too. How many grams is lethal? 3. Okay, that's the, and again, anybody can look at our record here in St. Louis County and what we've done with drug courts. I hope that we're a model for other areas, because we do prosecute all offenses. We haven't decided, no, we're not going to address the minor ones. We'll defer prosecution, but we address them. And we have treatment programs. Teen Challenge, Minnesota Teen Challenge. I know many of you are aware of that. Phenomenal program, great results. We have the Northeast Regional Corrections Center here in St. Louis County. They have one of the best chemical dependency treatment programs. You go up there, you get, if you're in custody for local time up to a year, you're going to get tested, and you'll find out if you do have an addiction problem, and we'll try to address it. So I agree 100% with what some of you have said. We do have an obligation to help people kick this habit, okay? And so we need to work hard on that. And I know Commissioner Schnell believes in that too in prison. So thank you.
All right. Let's see, Chair Mariani.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know time is short, so I'll be respectful and make this very concise.
And we still wanted to just finish up with just a lingering question or two with Commissioner Harrington as well.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very quickly, and County Attorney Rubin, you and I visited, and I really appreciate our conversation. I also appreciate your work, and I do appreciate what you're wrestling with. You know, since you and I met, my wife, through her extended family, lost a young person precisely to this. Just, a matter of a few weeks ago, and I knew this young man when he was a tiny tot. So it's heartbreaking. The issue, quite squarely is that the data that we see from across the country is that 39 states have passed harsher penalties since 2011, precisely on fentanyl. and we've not seen a reduction of deaths in those states. I want to do what's helpful and useful and that works. I know you do as well. And I've expressed with you, so I'm not hiding everything, my concern that we don't repeat the failed war on crime or war on drugs, thinking that led to the imprisonment of lots of folks whose crime really is that they were addicts. And we know the racial disparities, behind that as well. And so as we continue to have this conversation, because time is short here, I really want to encourage us to focus on that as well, so that we get closer to doing what's helpful, as opposed to doing what may have collateral consequences that neither you want or that I want either. So I'll just leave it at that, Mr. Chair, because I know time is short. But I just want to really, get out, for the record that I welcome this conversation, and I want to make sure that whatever we decide actually does work, makes a difference. In my mind, the worst case scenario is that we throw a whole lot of addicts in prisons and people are still dying out there. I don't think anybody wants that. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chair, and look forward to continuing this conversation.
Judge Small, did you want to make comment?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the opportunity here. I want to say that the County Attorneys Association certainly appreciates the concern that Representative Mariani has just expressed. And any time there is an increase in criminal penalties, the legislature ought to give very careful consideration and thoughtful consideration about what those increased penalties might have, particularly on communities of color. The County Attorneys Association certainly appreciates that. And it brings me back to a couple of years ago when our association led the effort for drug reform. And it was at that time, the conference committee led by the leadership of Senator Latz, who was then the chair of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate, Representative Cornish, who was the chair in the House, and the bipartisan method by which the Drug Reform Act was looked at, and the only increase in penalties were directed at those who were wreaking havoc in our communities and were extremely negatively impacting public safety in the communities. And that bipartisan group was able to come to an agreement about treatment for addicts, increased penalties for dealers. That's what we're trying to do again here under the leadership, hopefully, of Representative Mariani and Senator Limmer, to reach a bipartisan agreement to stop the wreaking of havoc in our communities that this fentanyl drug is causing. That's all I wanted to say, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity for me to do that.
Thank you, Judge Small. If we have some quick questions, Representative Fraser.
Mr. Chair, just quickly, I had a couple of follow-ups before, but just quickly, I mean, my whole point is, if you could get me some evidence of just this method, this way that we want to go, if that could work, that would be great. When the county attorney held up that newspaper with that headline, that reminded me of my youth growing up with the crack epidemic that was going on in communities that I grew up in. And the war on drugs absolutely did not help those communities at all. It did the exact opposite. It actually goes back to a point I made earlier about the incarceration rate. So any evidence you can get me, that'd be great to get me on board. But I'm looking for that evidence. We do know that the resources and preventative measures have been successful. The doctor stated those. We've seen data on that. So I'm looking for similar evidence like that to kind of help me decide this and process everything.
Right.
And I do have questions that go back to Commissioner Harrington and Superintendent as well.
We're trying to get to them. Representative Mahler, quick question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Yep, this is just to correct the record. I'm looking at Senate File 1279 right now, and as it's written, As the engrossed version has, it has possession, second degree possession is 6 grams or more, not 25 for fentanyl. And third degree possession would be 3 grams or more. And it just goes back to my point of criminalizing somebody who may not know that they're actually possessing fentanyl. I think those amounts are pretty low. So thank you. That's all.
All right. Let's see. We're going to move back. Thank you, all of our testifiers regarding fentanyl, Dr. Resnikoff, County Attorney Rubin, and Judge Small. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're now going to move on back to John Harrington, Commissioner of Public Safety. And are there any questions while we have them for just a few minutes more? I know that Tim Miller, you had your hand up earlier. Do you have a question?
I'll hopefully this is working. Senator or Chair, thank you very much.
We hear you.
And yeah, in light of the time, I'm going to constrain this to more as a quick comment to Commissioner Harrington and actually to the conferees. There's one more I wanted to say, but I understand the time, so I'm going to just kind of keep this concise. This whole discussion today, I can really probably wrap up in this. So when I look at public safety, I say, when I'm hearing the questions raised are, who are we keeping safe, or who do we need to keep safe, and who are we keeping them safe from? And that's what I hope that the commissioner and the department is always asking those questions. And as we put policy forward, I hear ideologies and I hear perspectives coming in, which is good and it's going to be natural. But I'm hearing it kind of showing up in the wrong places. So early on in our discussion, when it was talk about white supremacists, and I've had this conversation with Representative Frazier, I have no problem talking about that issue, but we need to keep it in context of the fact that we had 6 state representatives that were called white supremacists and insurrectionists for speaking on January 6th in the Minnesota State Capitol. And so when some of these words, unfortunately, are kind of like trigger words, and I don't even like using that phrase, but that's what happens. And so I hope that as we address these things with the Department of Public Safety, Commissioner Harrington, and us as conferees, we remember those 2 questions. Who are we trying to keep safe, and who are we trying to keep them safe from? I think if we form policy like that, we can come together on a lot of these different things. And if we can park at the door our preconceived notions of what that means. On one of the comments, when it was brought up about broken families, there was this immediate jump to broken families mean broken Black families. I can tell you out here, we have very few minority people. We have some Hispanics, we have a few Black families, but it's generally white out here. And I can tell you, we have broken families, and all the effects of that, of drug use, of gangs, of domestic violence, systemic poverty, whatever generational poverty, all those things. So when Senator Mark Johnson brings up something very important about broken families, we're not talking about broken Black families. So let's keep in mind who it is we're trying to keep safe and who we're trying to keep it safe from. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Representative Miller. Representative Frazier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Representative Miller, I absolutely appreciate you, and we have had conversations and we'll continue to have more. Just one, Black families were absolutely explicitly mentioned. That's why I responded the way I did. So I just want to note that for the record, and anyone who's watching can go back and listen to that and hear it in the way I did. The other question to white supremacy, yeah, I don't think I've ever called any of my legislative colleagues white supremacists. But what I am reacting to with the bill that I brought to address is what the FBI has told us and what we're seeing from the investigation that's happening right now from January 6th. And the question from Senator Johnson was, have we seen this situation in the state of Minnesota? There was a study done by the Minnesota, It was a study done by the Minnesota Justice Research Center, and they did specifically deal with what's happening in Minnesota. And they noted instances in the state of Minnesota from officers in Burnsville and Rochester that were engaged with white supremacist groups in social media and also in reports from those officers. We also had a situation where an officer in St. Paul had a known symbol of a white supremacist group in his windshield And now St. Paul is looking at their policies on how they can address that. We also had an investigation in our National Guard unit in the state of Minnesota, where they actually found that one of their trainees or members that was coming into the Guard actually had association and affiliation with a white supremacist group. So it is here, it is real. We should not ignore that. The evidence is out there, and we're trying to, as someone mentioned earlier, we're trying to get out in front of this to make sure that our communities can trust that there are no folks associated with or affiliated with white supremacist group or supporting white supremacist group in our law enforcement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative Fraser. Final discussion, Senator Matthews.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the conversation, the questions that I and others have asked regarding the agencies we have to consider, the budget decisions. And I too want to correct some of the record that's been shared today. I appreciate Representative Miller for starting to bring this up. You know, we do want to follow the law. That includes from the governor all the way down. And we've had a robust debate over the last year about Chapter 12, did he go too far, or how's that being used? And we can have those policy discussions. But we veered off into stating about defending people breaking the law in communities that look like mine. And Mr. Chair, that's both morally reprehensible and factually wrong. If you actually knew the people that I've been trying to work with, try to support and try to defend, that have gone through very difficult scenarios. Me and my House member have been trying to help a lot of families around here. They don't all look like me. And that doesn't make a difference to me. I want to reach out and help those that are struggling. Insinuation was made that it's employers out trying to force their employees back. Again, factually incorrect. If you knew the people that I've been trying to work with and help, the employees and their families that have been asking for it, we can have the policy debates, members, and we should. But the further insinuations go above and beyond, do more harm than good in getting to good policy here. I appreciate this robust discussion we've had, and even before being in the legislature, I served as a pastor of a small rural church, and I saw a lot of broken families in my communities, and a lot of people that do look like me, and watched some of the problems that would result from that, how it got them in the legal system, and it does hurt deep down inside when you want to try to reach them and you want to try to help these families, and choices drag them off the right path more and more, and they get into trouble and problems, and their families impacted, and the legal system is involved. That hurt my pastor's heart, trying to reach out and help those people, because I care about them, because I've tried to help reach those families and continue to do that from my vantage point now, being blessed with the privilege of representing my district here in the Senate. So I want to reframe that here, Mr. Chair. I want to thank members for their discussion. I want to thank Commissioner Harrington for answering some questions as I'm weighing out different factors and roles that we're considering here. We all are wanting to do what's right. We are all, as was stated earlier, we don't share lived experiences with anyone else. God's made us all unique. We're all made in God's image, and we've all had a very unique life story and fact scenario. And I appreciate that. And so I'll leave it at that here, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the conversation.
Thank you. We've had a very roundabout discussion today on a variety of other issues. We're now out of time. We'll be meeting tomorrow. What time do we begin, Carlos?
Yeah, Warren, we're gonna begin at 1 p.m. So the time that our leaders have set aside for us.
All right. Well, thank you all for the participation, and we now stand adjourned. Thank you.